Okay, today we're going to talk about building atmosphere in your scene. So, on the D2L, let me just pull this up. So on the D2L, oops, let's see here, my mouse is not behaving. Under content, under demo resources right here. So under the demo resources, somewhere in here, look for Atmosphere Model 2 and download this. So just click on the arrow, right click download. And what you can do here is if you have a project folder already, we can just copy this Maya binary into the file from the downloads folder into the scenes folder here. So I already have a project that I'm doing. It's a bit of a Goliath, as you can see here. But so I might just copy and paste the Maya binary into my scenes folder. Also, if you don't already have a project open or something, you can just, I think for this demo, it's okay just to go File, Open, and then find that Maya binary file and open it there. Let's see here. So now I have to find this thing. Here it is, Atmosphere Model 2. And so what this model is that I made is a really simple shape here. Should look like this. And if you look in your outliner, so again, under the outliner, that's Windows, Outliner, right there. We have an upper level and a lower level. So on the upper level, just select the upper level and press H and just hide it away here. Not deleting it, just hiding it for a moment. And so we'll have this. And so I'm going to show two types of atmosphere here. And the first atmosphere is called volume. And so this volume atmosphere, the way that it's computed is that it works best with Arnold area lights. And the reason for that is that the atmosphere kind of computes the distance from the light and kind of starts creating atmosphere from there. And with a directional light or any kind of infinite light that you create, it's not going to work because it's a light coming from an infinite direction, and so it just won't work quite as well. So that's just a lot of words to say. Arnold Lights, let's make an area light right here. So I'm going to leave that up for a second. So pull up the scene, open it up, hide that upper level, and then go to Arnold Lights area light right there. And now we need to position this thing. So you can either use the move, rotate, and scale tool to position it, or you can press W, E, and R for that. And so I'm just going to move it and scale it up. And so typically with an area light, the way it works is this line right here where my cursor is indicates the direction the light is pointing in. So right now, if I were to render this, a light would be emanating out and lighting this direction over here, but it would be black over here. So I'm just going to select that. I'm going to move it up a little bit and rotate it into position. If you hold down J, you can snap it. So one thing you can do is just get it right to 90 degrees and then kind of make little adjustments from there just to position it. Like a little bit of a 3/4 angle is good here. And then move the light after that. I find it easiest to move the light when it's in this world mode. And what I mean by that is the X, Y, and Z. Notice how those arrows are moving along the grid, and the Z, the X, and the Y. If these arrows, when you press W or you press this move tool, correspond with this light right here, differently than what you see right here, the way to fix that is if you just double click right here on this move tool, and right now I have it set to world, which is what I want. But if we have it set to object, you see how those arrows now move in the direction of the light. So when it comes to positioning lights, I find it a little bit easier to position in the world mode. And so these settings between world and object right here, that exist for the move tool, it works for the rotate tool, and it works for the scale tool as well. When you just double click them, you can kind of find this setting up here. So anyway, we're just gonna move this light. If you recall, the area light, there's a few controls with it. So if we have it large, the shadows will be soft. If we have it small, the shadows will be really tight and sharp. So just keep that in mind as you kind of position your lights. And so this is an area light, and we're going to render it in Arnold, and because of that, we're going to need to take the intensity and bring it way up. Particularly because this scene right here, you see we have the grid right there. I've made the scene pretty large, or relatively large, and so we're going to need to take the light intensity and push it up a bit here in order to get things visible. So select the light, the area light that we made, look for the attribute editor over to the right. It should show up somewhere on the screen. And then look for the tab 2 that says AI Area Light Shape 1. And here you should find this window. And that's the window we're going to be dealing with a lot here right now. So we can set the color of the light. The most important thing we need to set though is the intensity of the light. This thing needs to be, for a scene like this, it might need to be at 40,000. And so let's set that at 40,000. And let's go ahead and go to Arnold and Render and see what the scene looks like. So again, I just went up here to Arnold and then Render. In here, we can kind of see that this scene's already looking okay. I'm just going to click the middle mouse button just to move this around, and then Option, right click, left to right to zoom it in a little. So here I have a large light, so the shadows are pretty soft right there. If I say, hey, I want those shadows to be hard here, I'll just scale that light so that it's small. And now, when I zoom in, we have hard shadows right there. You see that? So those are the intensity and the size of the area light are the two main controls, I feel like. I'm going to keep the render view right here and then keep my attributes over here. So let's just jump through these attributes for a second. So we can set the color of the light by double clicking right there, so we can have it be any color we like. Right there. I can continue to add some intensity to it if I want it to be a little bit brighter. Exposure has to deal with, I'm just kind of moving, top to bottom down through this thing, is, actually, let's not move chronologically. Let me show you the most important things first and then move on to the others. So the most important things, size of the light, the color of the light, the intensity of the light, right here. Let's move down a little bit. So just scrub this down just a little bit until you see the samples. It should say 1, and there should be a slider right next to it. It should be right below soft edge. And so if you have graininess in your renders, a lot of the time, much of that graininess is from this right here. So the samples are set to 1 by default, which will give you grainy renders. Just go ahead at the beginning of your projects, just move this up to 2. And when you move the samples of the shadows up to 2, it gets rid of a lot of the graininess for you, and it doesn't really add that much render time. And if you move it from 2 to 3, or even 3 to 4, you kind of get diminishing returns at that point, and it's hard to tell the difference, honestly. Like I've done A/Bs before between it, and the renders mostly look the same to me. If you're going for a super high res render, you might want to move it up to 3, but 2 is fine right here. So I jumped down to there. So that's the next most important control right there. So don't get that confused with volume samples. It's just plain old samples right here. And so I'm going to move back to the top here and show some of these other controls with the area light. We have the exposure. And so what the exposure does is, I'll do the slider here to demonstrate, but it kind of adds kind of a diffuse light. Do you see that? So I'm going to edit undo. So that's it at default. And keep your eye on these outer areas right here. So what I mean by diffuse light is it just starts to light up more of the space a little bit. So just with the exposure, I'll bring it up. And you see those areas just start to get a little bit brighter there. So if you want an area light just to kind of cover more of your scene, you can kind of take the exposure up and the intensity down. You see more of the scene is lit up now. I kind of like it the way it was though for this particular instance. Next up, we're going to scroll down a little bit, and the last thing I want to show here is the spread. So the spread here is kind of like barn doors on a light on a film set. And so the way barn doors work is, if you can imagine, they're on the side of the lights. Here, why don't I just Google this? So here we go. This is an example of barn doors. That is loading real slow. Okay, here we go. So you put this around the light, and so when they're open, like it is in that photograph, you're going to get a diffuse light like this. But then when you close them in, you'll start to focus the light. And so filmmakers will use this all the time to kind of light scenes. And so the spread slider right here kind of does a very similar thing here. So it's by default it's set to 1, so the barn doors are wide open. And then if you lower that number, the barn doors are going to start to close. So you see there, you can kind of focus the light. And the intensity gets brighter as you focus it in here. So you might, if you decide to focus your barn doors in by using the spread slider, you might need to take your intensity down a little bit. And between that and the exposure, you can kind of get a lot of control over your light here. So that's the area light. So let's keep this moving. So let's just say you have your scene lit and you like the way it's looking here. And so let me just save the scene real quick in case anything happens. So I'm just going to call this Atmosphere Model 3. And so now let's start to worry about adding some atmosphere. So the way to add the atmosphere is if you go up here to render settings. So on your render icons, the one with the gear on it up here, I'll click that. So we'll get this render settings window. And let's move to the second tab, the one called Arnold Render. And side note here is, you remember how I was talking about getting rid of grain in your renders and taking that that samples slider from 1 to 2 under your lights attributes does a lot to get rid of grain. When you start to get towards your final renders, I wouldn't do this during this step of the process where you're just kind of trying to find your lighting scheme, because this will add a lot to your render time. But one of the main ways to get rid of grain is under Camera AA on this Arnold Render. All these sliders right here are really helpful. And you might want to, if you have grain in your renders, just move the slider up to 5 or 6, try that out. And if you still need some more, keep moving that up. Same with these sliders right here, but the Camera AA I get the most results out of typically. Diffuse and Specular, diffuse is Maya's word for color, so like the color of your model, so this is a good one. Specularity is the white highlights that show up, so if the resolution of your white highlights could use a little juice, you can move this up. Transmission refers to transparency, so if you have glass in your scene, this would be a good slider to move up, but if you don't have glass, then don't worry about it. SSS stands for Subsurface Scattering, and so that has to deal with if you have a wax material or a human skin kind of like material where light is bouncing around in there. The scene does not have it, so you wouldn't need to move it up. And then finally, volume indirect has to deal with the amount of times a light ray bounces within the scene. So right now, the lights from that area light are bouncing once, and then if there's another surface up here, they could bounce again, but then they're done. So moving the slider up will kind of typically add some, particularly if you have a complicated scene, it'll cause the light to bounce around, and so it'll make your scene a little bit brighter and also a little more realistic. So that's the volume indirect right there. So that's these sliders right here. So that's just a side note. Moving on to atmosphere here. So we're under this Arnold Render tab and moving down to environment. So there's this environment box, and you see where it says atmosphere here, and then we have a checkerboard box next to it. So if you, this area right here is grayed out, so you can't even really click in it for atmosphere. But if you click here where the checkerboard box is, this menu will come up, and we have a couple of options. And so the first one we're going to do is the first one there, which is create AI atmosphere volume. So I'm going to click that, and it's not going to look like anything happened here. So I'll click that. Looks like nothing happened, but it added an atmosphere volume here. And the reason it's not showing up right now is the density is set at 0. Before I start showing the controls of the atmosphere volume though, let me show you where you can find it. Because you can see here, we clicked atmosphere volume, it's in the attribute editor. But notice if I just, in the scene, if I just click off of it, it goes away. So where can we find the atmosphere volume if you click off of it and you need to adjust it again? It's under the hypershade, which is this button right here, the little egg icon and the render icons up here. So let's click on the hypershade. And you can see here, when you click on the hypershade, this is a little confusing because of the way I name things. Let me just, this material right here is called Atmosphere Model because that's the name of the project, and we imported the project in, if you recall. But notice, let's see, this right here, this node right here, that's the atmosphere. So just look in your material. So under your hypershade, under your materials folder, in the top, it should be in the top left, and look for the AI atmosphere volume. And so when you click on that, that'll give you your controls again for the atmosphere. And so that AI atmosphere volume is pretty simple. It's so the density is the main slider, and you only need a little bit before it starts to show up right there. You see there, I just moved it. It's at 0.007, and now we have atmosphere in the scene. And by default, that looks pretty cool, at least to my eye. So you can see here that we have the light emanating out. So if you had if you're rendering a scene with a UFO coming down, or if you have a car or a vehicle with headlights that you want to render, I think this is a really good technique for kind of showing that. And yeah, just moving the density up should get it kind of looking pretty cool. So let's just go through the rest of these controls. So the color is the color of the fog or the atmosphere in there. So right now it's set to white. Typically what I would want is, I like to have white fog, and then if I want the fog to be a different color, I'll just change the color of the light itself. But you can change the color of the fog here. So let me just change it to a green here. So you see here that the fog is green. It just looks a little weird. I don't know. This can get good results. I don't want to be too hard on it. But you see here, I gave it a subtle blue, and I gave the light a little bit of a subtle blue, and that kind of helps give a nice result. And yeah, so typically white's what you want, but you can kind of change the colors, and you can try extreme stuff, but it can, it gets a little funky in there. And typically I usually get the best results either in a white setting or a subtle setting. And then if I want a really bright color here, I'll just change my lights to be red or whatever color I want it to be. So here, I'll just show that real quick. So I'll take the color of the light, I'll make it fuchsia. That's a bit much, but you get the idea. When you change the color of the light, I feel like it just kind of behaves a little more realistically here. So I'll just kind of bring this back to approximately where it was here on a subtle blue. And so the light is selected right now. You see AI area light shape right there. So I'm gonna just on the hypershade, click on that atmosphere material right there to select the atmosphere again, just to bring back those controls. So we have density, I showed color there. Then under that is attenuation. Attenuation, it means how difficult it is for the light to move through the existing fog. So if I move the slider up, it's going to get darker here because the light is having to work harder to kind of get through that fog. So you can kind of bring that set that up, but when you bring that up, you might need to take your select your light right there, take the intensity up to account for it. So now it's at 80,000. And so let's just keep moving through. So now the light is selected again, so I need to just select the atmosphere once more, which is in the hypershade. So that's attenuation right there. And so whenever I'm kind of adjusting fog here, I'm doing a back and forth between the light and the fog and going between those two. Samples has to do with the resolution of the fog. I'm just going to leave it at 5 for now. But kind of when you get to the rendering process, that can be helpful. And then anistropy, I don't know how to pronounce that. Anistropy is something we'll show here now. And the way to show it is it has to deal with the light and shadow beams, the way that they're cast here. So if you go over to the outliner, which should be on the left here. If you don't see it, Windows, Outliner, right there. Find that upper level and press H to bring back that upper level visible here. And so if we take that view, I'm going to make it a little smaller. And then we navigate kind of below the ceiling here that I made. Let's just see what this thing's doing. Here we go. So this angle kind of shows it. I'm going to take my light and I'm going to take my area light and I'm going to boost that intensity up even more. Let's see, let's do 120,000 just to get the scene a little brighter. So anisotropy, you see how this light is casting those shadow rays through there? So that's something that's really nice about fog. And so if you have this works for daylight or nighttime shots. If you're going for something Tim Burton-y or something like that, this can be helpful too, where you can just kind of get these shadow rays coming through so that they're visible in the scene. And so the anisotropy, if I click that atmosphere again in the hypershade, so if I move the slider up, just kind of keep your eye on how some of this behaves. So I've moved the anisotropy up to a high degree. I'm moving the anisotropy down. And then here, I kind of have it in the middle. So I feel like the best way to kind of show that is just to kind of show it. Typically, I kind of like it close to where it is by default, which is 0. In here, it just kind of depends. You can kind of like, just get some really cool results with this, I feel like. And so here the angle that your area light is positioned makes a huge difference. And again, we're just kind of, I'm navigating my camera around from that bottom view now. And sometimes the kind of shadow, the light rays don't show up as much depending on the angle of the camera and the angle of the light. It just kind of depends how those correspond with each other. So I'll just let this render here for a moment so you can see that. And so if you're kind of going for a scene like this, like an interior, I feel like this AI volume is a good option here. And so let me just hide that. Also good for I don't know, useful for a lot of stuff, I feel like. So I feel like it's, if you have a room that you want to have just a little atmosphere like this, you know, that can look nice too, like a studio space. And so let me move on. Yeah, so there's that render right there. So just a little bit of atmosphere can go like, you know, a long way here, you know, with this kind of render. And so let's show the other kind of atmosphere. So I'll minimize my hypershade here. And so before I show the next kind of atmosphere. Let's just say that you made an atmosphere volume and you're like, I don't want this in my scene. The way to get rid of it is under render settings. So we open up render settings, which again is this gear icon right there. And just where it says AI atmosphere volume under environment tab, under Arnold Render, just hold down, normal click, hold down on this checkerboard, and then just go down to delete right there. So I just, where it says AI atmosphere volume next to, on the checkerboard, I'll just click on it and then go to the bottom and delete it. And that'll delete the atmosphere volume there. So moving on to the next kind of atmosphere, it is atmosphere, create AI fog. So again, this is the checkerboard and then it's create AI fog right there. And so let me just pull back up my render view. And so this AI fog just behaves a little bit differently. So, and by a little bit, I mean a lot. You can see here as I rotate my camera, you can see where that fog, it kind of creates like this horizontal split through the scene. And then as you rotate to one side, we're kind of on the wrong side of the fog right now. And I rotate over and I'm on, you know, what I consider the right side of the fog. And this fog, I typically, in my experience, I don't use it quite as much, but I think it works better for if you have like a landscape that you're working on and you want the fog to just kind of be present in one area of your composition but not in another. So if you want some like atmospheric perspective in your scene or something like that, I think this can be a potentially helpful tool. So here under the hypershade, same thing. You can see AI fog got created as a material there. So if you want to select it, you can just click it there in the hypershade if you ever need to find it. And so here we have these controls for the AI fog. You can change the color of it. So you can see there, that's a pretty drastic color I just chose there. And so the distance, if we set that, it's typically computed from distance from the camera. Or it could be the center of the, you know, it might be the center of the grid here. So let me just see here. So albeit, so we have the distance slider right here. So I set it to 6.7. And you can see here we have the atmosphere is kind of not affecting this area here, but it's kind of coming in strong for those other pillars there, eyeing them up. Then as I increase the slider, it starts to look like that. So by default, the height is at 5. This is something I always just have to tinker around with before I can get it. So let's move the height to 6. Let's try 11. Okay. Now I'll just kind of start to adjust the distance again. So those are those three controls. These other ones I really have to kind of work with to kind of get them right, but they typically, the ground normal kind of rotates the position of it. Do you see that? So is under 0 right here, and right here I typed in, let's type in 2. See how it rotated the fog? So you can kind of reposition the fog here. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So for that second control is at 0. You see how the angle changed? Like keep your eye over here, and then I'm just going to click 1. It's like it rotates it. I'm honestly kind of find it 0, 0. I might just type in 1 there for that first one. Same thing over here as it just rotates it. So ground point. Let's try So typically this has to deal with kind of where that fog starts off and how it positions in the scene. But you can see here that I've kind of set it so that these areas up front are not affected by the fog hardly at all. And then as we move back, they're affected more and more. As I do the distance slider, I could have that fog kind of encroach, oops, more and more onto the scene until it just blows out the whole thing. If I type in 0.005, let's see what happens there. Okay, here we go. So I typed in 25 under ground point, this XYZ right here. So 25 kind of moves the fog this way. If I type in negative 25, you see it moves it back the other way. So the ground point, is, I don't know why they name it this way. There's probably a good reason for it. I just don't quite know right now. But the ground normal, typically the way I think about it, rotates the position of the fog. Ground point does the actual physical position of it. So I had to kind of work through it to find the XYZ here. But if I move it negative 25, the fog moves it back that way. If I type in 25 here, it moves it towards us. And whether that's what you want or not in your scene is going to be dependent on where you have your camera positioned, right? Is which one of these that you're going to want this to be. And so just imagining that these are like skyscrapers or something like that, you know, this can be a pretty good control here. Let me help just illustrate that a little bit by actually scaling them up. And so you can kind of get some interesting results too with this one. The results that I get with AI fog reminds me a little bit of like, to me it looks like slightly less realistic, and it looks more, shoot, what is the name of that video game I'm thinking of? Drawing a blank. Oh well. But more of a graphic look to it or something like that. But can be really good for more like of a landscape type of fog if you want that one. So that's the AI fog. And then to get rid of that one, if you try it out and it's, you know, not what you want, you just go to the render settings button again, look for that second tab, the Arnold Render, go down to environment tab, and then it says AI fog right there, and just click on the checkerboard and then delete it, and now the fog is gone there.